You finally finish cleaning your apartment. Everything is put away. The surfaces are clear. The dishes are done. There's actual empty space on your counters. The floor is visible. It should feel good. It should feel satisfying. You did the thing. You created the space you thought you wanted. But instead, something feels wrong. You can't sit still. You keep getting up to check things. Your chest is tight. There's this low hum of anxiety you can't explain. You might even find yourself pulling things back out, leaving a jacket on the chair, letting the mail pile up again. Not because you're lazy, because something about all that clean, open space makes you want to crawl out of your skin. You might find yourself checking your phone compulsively, even though no one has messaged you. You might turn on the television just to have some noise, some movement, some stimulation in the space. You might start cleaning something else, not because it needs cleaning, but because the activity gives you something to do with the discomfort you're feeling. Anything to avoid just sitting in the stillness. And you don't understand it. You wanted this. You worked for this. You watched the organizing videos. You bought the bins. You did the thing everyone says will make you feel better. But you don't feel better. You feel exposed. You feel like you're waiting for something bad to happen. If this sounds familiar, you're not broken. You're not crazy. You're not even unusual. What you're experiencing has a name. It has a neurobiological explanation, and it makes complete sense once you understand where it comes from. This is about why clean spaces feel unsafe to some people, why calm environments can trigger anxiety, why peace itself can feel like a threat. And it starts with something that happened long before you ever picked up a mop. Your nervous system learned what normal meant when you were a child. And if normal meant chaos, unpredictability, walking on eggshells, never knowing what was coming next, then your brain built itself around that. It calibrated to that. It set its baseline there. And now, decades later, when you create an environment that's calm, ordered, peaceful, your nervous system doesn't recognize it. It doesn't feel like relief. It feels like something is missing. Something is wrong. The alarm bells start ringing, not because there's danger, but because there's an absence of the familiar chaos your brain learned to expect. Stephen Porges, the neuroscientist who developed Polyvagal theory, coined a term for this. He called it Neuroception. And understanding neuroception changes everything about how we think about trauma, anxiety, and why some environments feel safe while others don't. Neuroception is your nervous system's way of constantly, unconsciously scanning the environment for cues of safety or danger. It happens below conscious awareness, in the primitive parts of your brain, faster than thought. Before you can even register what's happening, your body has already decided whether you're safe or not. And here's the thing. Neuroception isn't based on logic. It's based on pattern matching. Your nervous system compares what's happening right now to what it learned in the past. If the current situation matches patterns that were associated with safety, it relaxes. If it matches patterns associated with threat, it activates. And this happens automatically, without your input or consent. So imagine a child growing up in a home where things were unpredictable. Maybe there was a parent with explosive anger. Maybe there was addiction, and you never knew what version of your parent you'd come home to. Maybe there was neglect, and the chaos was just the baseline hum of a household that wasn't functioning. Whatever the specifics, the child's nervous system learned that this was what life felt like. This level of tension, this background noise of potential danger, this was normal. The child's neuroception got calibrated to chaos. The nervous system learned that survival required vigilance. It learned to stay alert, to scan for shifts in mood, to anticipate trouble before it arrived. And this wasn't a flaw. This was intelligence. This was adaptation. This was a young brain doing exactly what it needed to do to navigate an unsafe environment. But the calibration doesn't reset just because you grow up and leave. The nervous system doesn't automatically update when you move into your own apartment, or start a new relationship, or build a life that's nothing like the one you grew up in. It keeps running the old program. It keeps scanning for the old threats. And when those threats don't appear, when the environment is actually calm and safe and quiet, your nervous system doesn't feel relief. It feels suspicious. Porges describes this as the nervous system having a bias toward detecting threat. It evolved this way because, from a survival standpoint, it's better to have false alarms than to miss a real danger. Better to feel afraid when you're actually safe than to feel safe when you're actually in danger. So the system errs on the side of caution. And for trauma survivors, that caution goes into overdrive. The thing that makes this so confusing is that you can know you're safe and still feel like you're in danger. You can look around your clean, quiet apartment and see that nothing is wrong. You can tell yourself there's no threat. You can try to logic your way out of the anxiety, but it doesn't work because neuroception doesn't respond to logic. It responds to felt sense. And your felt sense was programmed years ago in circumstances you might not even consciously remember. Deb Dana, who has done more than anyone to translate polyvagal theory into clinical practice, puts it this way: the autonomic nervous system is our personal surveillance system, always on guard, asking the question, is this safe? Its goal is to protect us by sensing safety and risk, listening moment by moment to what is happening in and around our bodies. For people who grew up in chaos, this surveillance system is set to high alert. It's always listening, always watching. And when the environment goes quiet, when there's nothing to monitor, the system doesn't stand down. It ramps up. Because in the past, quiet often meant something bad was coming. Think about what it was like if you grew up in a volatile home. The quiet was never just quiet. The quiet was the tension before an explosion. The quiet was your parent drinking in the other room. The quiet was everyone walking on eggshells, waiting for the thing that would set everything off. You learned to dread the quiet because the quiet was a warning. And now you're an adult and you've cleaned your apartment and everything is still and your body doesn't know the difference. Your body feels that stillness and pattern, matches it to all those other times when stillness preceded disaster. Your body starts bracing, your muscles tense, your breathing gets shallow. You start scanning for what's wrong, what you missed, what's about to happen. This is why some people can't relax in spa environments. This is why some people feel worse after meditation, not better. This is why the friend who says, just take a bath and calm down, doesn't understand that for you, calm itself is the problem. Your nervous system hasn't learned that calm can be trusted. It's still waiting for the other shoe to drop. Bessel van der Kolk, whose book The Body Keeps the Score has become the foundational text on trauma, describes it this way: after trauma, the world is experienced with a different nervous system. The survivor's energy now becomes focused on suppressing inner chaos at the expense of spontaneous involvement in their lives. What he means is that trauma changes how you perceive everything. It's not just that you have bad memories, it's that your entire sensory system has been recalibrated. You're experiencing the world through a nervous system that learned threat was everywhere, that learned vigilance was survival, that learned to never fully let down its guard. And here's what's particularly cruel about this: the very experiences you need in order to heal, the calm, the safety, the peace, those are the experiences that trigger you the most. The medicine tastes like poison. The cure feels like the disease. You're trapped in a paradox where what would help you is the thing you can't tolerate. Van der Kolk also talks about something called the window of tolerance. This is a concept developed by Dan Siegel, and it refers to the zone of arousal in which you can function effectively. When you are inside your window of tolerance, you can think clearly, regulate your emotions, engage with others, handle stress without falling apart. When you're pushed outside your window, either into hyperarousal or hypoarousal, you start to dysregulate. You either get amped up, anxious, reactive, or you shut down, go numb, dissociate. For people who grew up in safe, stable environments, the window of tolerance is wide. They can handle a lot of variation in stimulation and arousal without getting thrown off. They can move between excitement and calm, between challenge and rest, without losing their footing. But trauma narrows the window, sometimes dramatically. If you grew up in chronic chaos, your window of tolerance might be set almost entirely in the hyperarousal zone. High alert feels normal to you. That's where your window is. That's the state you're most familiar with, the state you know how to operate in. And calm? Calm is outside your window. Calm pushes you into unfamiliar territory. Your nervous system interprets that unfamiliarity as threat. And instead of relaxing, you dysregulate. You might get more anxious. You might feel suddenly depressed or empty. You might dissociate, feel unreal, like you're watching yourself from outside your body. These are all signs that you've been pushed outside your window of tolerance into a state your nervous system doesn't know how to handle. This explains something that confuses a lot of trauma survivors. They think that if they could just get their life calm enough, they'd finally feel okay. So they work towards stability, they build routines, they create order. And then they get there, and instead of feeling better, they feel worse. They wonder what's wrong with them. Why can't they just enjoy what they've built? Nothing is wrong with them. Their nervous system just hasn't caught up to their circumstances. The external environment has changed, but the internal calibration hasn't. They're experiencing peace through a system that was tuned for war. This brings us to the physical space piece specifically, because it's not just that calm feels threatening in general. For many people, there's something particular about clean, tidy, organized environments that triggers discomfort. Part of this is pure unfamiliarity. If you grew up in a cluttered, chaotic home, then sparse, minimalist spaces violate your expectations. Your brain is a prediction machine. It's constantly generating expectations about what's going to happen next based on what's happened before. When reality matches your predictions, you feel at ease. When it doesn't match, you feel unsettled. A clean room might be objectively pleasant, but if it doesn't match your internal template of what a home looks like, your brain registers the mismatch as something to pay attention to. But there's more to it than just unfamiliarity. Clutter actually serves a psychological function for some people. It provides continuous sensory input. It gives you something to look at, something to think about, something to attend to. And for people whose nervous systems are calibrated to vigilance, that constant stimulation is oddly soothing. It gives the hypervigilant brain something to do. Take that stimulation away, and suddenly the brain has nothing external to focus on, which means it turns inward. And for trauma survivors, turning inward can be terrifying, because inward is where the pain is. Inward is where the memories are. Inward is where that unprocessed distress is sitting, waiting to be felt. Clutter, in a strange way, can be protective. It's a distraction. It's a barrier between you and yourself. When the environment is busy and chaotic, you don't have to sit with your own experience. There's always something else to attend to, something else to manage, something else to react to. Clean the space, and you remove that buffer. You're left alone with yourself. And for some people, that's the scariest thing of all. There's also the issue of control. Chaos can feel, paradoxically, more controllable than order. In a messy environment, your vigilance has purpose. You can scan, you can manage, you can anticipate. The mess gives you a job to do. Order takes that job away. There's nothing left to manage. And if you've built your sense of safety around being the one who stays alert, who watches for problems, who holds it all together, then having nothing to hold together feels like having the ground pulled out from under you. This connects to something researchers have observed about people who grow up in chaotic homes. They often become hypercompetent. They learn to manage everything because no one else was going to. They become the responsible one, the one who keeps track, the one who makes sure things don't fall apart. And they carry that into adulthood. They become the friend who always has it together, the co-worker who takes on extra responsibility, the partner who manages the household. But this hypercompetence is exhausting, and it's also hard to put down. Because if you've survived by being in control, by being vigilant, by being the one who handles things, then relaxing your grip feels like inviting disaster. You can't just stop watching. You can't just stop managing. What if something goes wrong? What if you miss something? What if the chaos you've been holding back floods in the moment you let your guard down? This is why clean spaces can feel unsafe. Not because there's anything objectively threatening about them, but because they represent a letting go, a surrender of vigilance, a trust that things will be okay, even if you're not watching. And for someone whose survival depended on always watching, that trust doesn't come easy. It doesn't come at all, actually. Not without significant work. Let's talk about relationships for a moment. Because the same pattern that makes clean spaces feel threatening often shows up in how people relate to others. If you grew up in chaos, stable relationships might feel wrong to you. A partner who's consistent, available, emotionally steady, that partner might feel boring, or suspicious, or too good to be true. You might find yourself more attracted to partners who are unpredictable, who run hot and cold, who keep you guessing, not because you enjoy the pain, but because that dynamic feels familiar. That's what love felt like growing up. That's what your nervous system recognizes as relationship. John Bowlby, the father of attachment theory, called these internal working models. They're the mental templates we build in childhood for how relationships work. If your early caregivers were consistent and responsive, you build a template that says, relationships are safe, people can be trusted, my needs will be met. If your early caregivers were unpredictable or frightening, you build a different template. One that says love is unreliable, people can't be trusted, I have to stay vigilant. And here's the thing about internal working models. They don't just shape your expectations, they shape your attractions. You're drawn to what matches your template. A secure person looks for other secure people, but an insecurely attached person might be drawn to relationships that recreate the chaos they grew up with, not consciously, not because they want to suffer, but because familiarity registers as comfort even when the familiar thing was painful. This creates a cruel dynamic. You might find someone wonderful, someone kind, consistent, available, and instead of feeling grateful, you feel anxious. Something must be wrong. They must be hiding something. Or maybe you're just bored. There's no spark, there's no intensity, there's no drama. You start wondering if you even like them. You start questioning whether this is real attraction or just settling. You start looking for problems, finding reasons it won't work, creating distance where there doesn't need to be any. Meanwhile, the person who treats you inconsistently, who keeps you off balance, who you never quite know where you stand with, that person feels electric. That person keeps your attention. That person activates all the neural circuitry that was built for hypervigilance. It feels like passion. It feels like chemistry. It's actually just your nervous system recognizing a familiar threat and responding accordingly. This is why people sometimes stay in relationships that aren't good for them. It's not that they don't see the problems. It's that on a nervous system level, the problems feel like home. The inconsistency feels like love. The chaos feels like connection. Leaving that for something stable would mean leaving everything familiar and entering unknown territory. And as we've established, the unknown feels dangerous, even when it's objectively safer. Researchers have studied something called trauma bonding, which helps explain the neurochemistry behind this. When you experience intermittent reinforcement, unpredictable alternation between kindness and mistreatment, between affection and withdrawal, it creates a powerful neurochemical response. Dopamine, the reward chemical, is actually released more powerfully by unpredictable rewards than by consistent ones. This is the same principle that makes slot machines addictive. The uncertainty is the hook. So if you grew up with a caregiver who was sometimes wonderful and sometimes terrifying, your brain got wired for that pattern. You learned to crave the good moments all the more because they were unpredictable. You learned that love was something you had to work for, wait for, hope for. And when you find a partner who provides that same pattern, the intermittent reinforcement kicks in, and it feels like the most intense connection you've ever had. Meanwhile, the partner who's consistently kind, no intermittent reinforcement, no unpredictability, no dopamine spikes. It feels flat by comparison. Your nervous system isn't activated. There's no drama to monitor. It must not be love. This is why some people sabotage good relationships. This is why some people leave wonderful partners to return to chaotic ones. This is why stability can feel like a trap and chaos can feel like freedom. The nervous system is seeking what it knows, and what it knows was programmed long before conscious choice entered the picture. There's a term for what happens when things start going too well. Gay Hendricks, a psychologist who spent years studying self-sabotage, calls it the upper limit problem. The idea is that each of us has an internal thermostat for how much happiness, success, and love we allow ourselves to experience. This thermostat gets set early in life, based on what we learned was acceptable, safe, and possible. And when we exceed that setting, when life starts getting better than our thermostat says is allowed, we unconsciously do something to bring ourselves back down. Hendricks writes that when we exceed our inner thermostat setting, we will often do something to sabotage ourselves, causing us to drop back into the old, familiar zone where we feel secure. This looks different for different people. Some people start fights with their partners right after moments of deep connection. Some people get sick immediately after achieving success. Some people manufacture crises, create problems, pick at wounds that were starting to heal. Some people simply withdraw, check out, numb themselves until the uncomfortable good feeling passes. The sabotage isn't conscious. You're not sitting there thinking, things are too good, I need to ruin this. But something in you is uncomfortable with the altitude. Something in you is waiting for the fall. And eventually, you make the fall happen yourself, just to get the waiting over with. For people who grew up in chaos, the upper limit is often set very low. You learn that good things don't last. You learn that happiness is always followed by pain. You learn to brace for impact even when no impact was coming. And now, when life is actually good, when your apartment is clean and your relationship is stable and nothing is wrong, your nervous system sounds the alarm. This is too good. Something bad must be coming. Better destroy it yourself than wait for the inevitable destruction. The phrase waiting for the other shoe to drop captures this perfectly. You're in a constant state of anticipation, braced for the disaster you're sure is coming. And the cruelty of it is that the waiting is often worse than any actual disaster would be. You're living in perpetual anxiety, perpetual vigilance, perpetual readiness for something that might never arrive. You can't enjoy what you have because you're too busy dreading its loss. Research shows that about 85% of things people worry about never actually happen. But for trauma survivors, that statistic doesn't help. The body remembers the times when the bad thing did happen. The nervous system is designed to weight threatening memories more heavily than safe ones. One bad experience can override dozens of good ones, and so you keep waiting, keep watching, keep expecting the shoe to drop even in houses where no one's throwing shoes anymore. So what do you do about this? How do you teach a nervous system that learned chaos was normal, that peace can be trusted? The first thing to understand is that you can't think your way out of this. The rational mind can't override the nervous system. You can tell yourself all day that you're safe, that the clean apartment isn't dangerous, that your stable partner isn't going to suddenly become abusive, and it won't make a difference. Because neuroception doesn't listen to words, it listens to felt sense. It responds to experience, not argument. This is why traditional talk therapy often isn't enough for trauma. You can understand your history perfectly. You can have beautiful insight, into why you are the way you are, and you can still be triggered by a clean room. Understanding is necessary, but it's not sufficient. The body has to learn, not just the mind. Let me tell you what this looks like in real life. Because it's one thing to understand the theory, and another thing to recognize how it actually plays out in the texture of daily experience. Imagine someone named Maria. She grew up in a house where her father's moods were unpredictable. He wasn't always violent, but he could be. And you never knew which version of him was going to walk through the door. So Maria learned to be hyper-aware. She learned to read the sound of the car pulling into the driveway. She learned to interpret the weight of footsteps on the stairs. She learned to monitor the tension in the air, the set of his jaw, the volume of his voice. Her survival depended on these readings. Her ability to anticipate danger kept her safer than she would have been otherwise. Maria is 35 now. She hasn't lived with her father in almost 20 years. She has her own apartment, a decent job, a partner who's nothing like her father. She's built a good life. But something weird happens every time she cleans. When her apartment is messy, she feels normal. Not great, but normal. The clutter doesn't bother her because it's familiar. It's what she grew up with. Her childhood home was always chaotic, things everywhere, dishes in the sink, papers on every surface. That visual noise is just background to her. She barely notices it, but when she cleans, really cleans, when she puts everything away and the surfaces are clear and there's space and order, something shifts. She starts feeling restless. She can't sit still. She keeps getting up to check things. She might open the refrigerator multiple times for no reason. She might look out the window, not looking for anything, just looking. Her partner asks what's wrong, and she doesn't know. Nothing is wrong. Everything is fine. That's the problem. The quiet, organized space has removed all the stimulation her nervous system uses to stay busy. There's nothing to scan, nothing to monitor, nothing to attend to. And without that external focus, Maria's attention turns inward. And inward is where the old feelings live. The anxiety, the vigilance, the waiting for something bad. She doesn't consciously think any of this. She just feels uncomfortable. She just wants to do something. So she finds something to do. She pulls out her laptop and creates some tasks for herself. Or she starts a project that generates some mess. Or she picks a small fight with her partner. Nothing serious, just enough to create a little drama, a little energy, a little something to attend to. And then she feels better, more normal, back on familiar ground. Maria isn't crazy. She's not broken. She's experiencing exactly what we've been talking about. Her nervous system learned to equate stimulation with safety. It learned that quiet was dangerous, and it keeps applying those lessons even though the circumstances have completely changed. For Maria to heal, she doesn't need to understand this intellectually. She already sort of understands it. What she needs is for her nervous system to have new experiences that contradict the old learning. She needs to spend time in clean, quiet spaces and have nothing bad happen. She needs to do this repeatedly in doses she can tolerate, with support from people who understand what she's going through. She needs to build a new relationship with stillness, one experience at a time. This is slow work. There's no shortcut. You can't hack your nervous system into trusting peace. You can only patiently teach it through repeated experiences that peace doesn't have to mean danger. Now let me tell you about someone else. Let's call him James. James's childhood wasn't violent, but it was emotionally chaotic. His mother was loving but unstable, swinging between periods of intense warmth and periods of complete withdrawal. When she was present, she was very present, sometimes overwhelmingly so. When she withdrew, it was like she disappeared. James never knew which version he'd get. This taught James that love was unreliable. It taught him to crave the intense moments of connection because they were unpredictable and therefore precious. It also taught him to distrust consistency because in his experience, consistency didn't exist. The pattern was the inconsistency. James is in his 40s now. He's been married, divorced, had several significant relationships. And there's a pattern he's starting to notice. The relationships that feel the most intense are usually the most unstable. The partners who make him feel most alive are usually the ones who are emotionally unavailable or unpredictable. And the partners who are actually good for him, the ones who are stable, consistent, emotionally present, those partners feel boring. He can't sustain attraction to them. He eventually pulls away or picks fights or does something to create distance. James knows this is a problem. He's smart enough to see the pattern. But seeing it doesn't stop it from happening because the pattern isn't running in his conscious mind. It's running in his nervous system, in his attachment circuitry, in the deep programming that determines what feels like love and what doesn't. For James, a stable, calm relationship feels like a clean room felt to Maria. It's unfamiliar. It lacks the stimulation his system is calibrated for. It doesn't create the neurochemical activation that his brain interprets as connection. So he experiences it as absence, as lack, as something missing. The partners who trigger him, who keep him guessing, who run hot and cold, those partners create the activation he's looking for. His nervous system recognizes that activation and labels it love, even though it's actually anxiety, even though it's actually the same vigilance he developed as a child, recycled into adulthood and disguised as passion. James' healing requires the same thing Maria's healing requires. New experiences that contradict old learning, staying in a stable relationship long enough for his nervous system to update its model of what love can feel like, tolerating the absence of intensity long enough to discover that presence has its own rewards, building capacity for steady warmth instead of just capacity for dramatic spikes. This is why therapy can be so important, because a good therapist provides exactly the kind of consistent, reliable relationship that people like James struggle to tolerate. And within that relationship, there's space to notice what comes up, to work with the discomfort, to gradually expand what feels possible. The therapy relationship itself becomes a laboratory for learning. The client has the experience of being met with consistency, not just once, but week after week. And over time, consistency starts to feel less threatening. The nervous system gets evidence that reliable presence exists, that it can be trusted, that it doesn't have to be the calm before the storm. This is what's called a corrective emotional experience. It's an experience that corrects the distorted learning from the past, not by arguing against it, not by convincing the mind that things are different now, but by providing direct felt experience that contradicts the old programming. The body learns what the mind couldn't teach it. This is why somatic experiencing, developed by Peter Levine, works directly with the body's stress responses. The idea is that trauma gets stuck in the nervous system when survival responses are interrupted. If you couldn't fight or flee, if you had to freeze or submit, that survival energy stays trapped in the body. It keeps cycling, looking for completion. Somatic work helps discharge that energy safely, allowing the nervous system to finally complete the responses it couldn't complete at the time of the trauma. Pat Ogden's sensor-emotor psychotherapy takes a similar approach, working with posture, gesture, and movement to release patterns held in the body. Ogden understands that our habitual ways of holding ourselves, the tension we carry, the positions we default to, these are intelligent adaptations to past experiences, but they may not serve us anymore. The body learned to brace, and it never learned to release. Therapy involves slowly, safely teaching it that release is possible. Deb Dana has developed practical exercises based on polyvagal theory that help people map their nervous system states, recognize when they're dysregulated, and find pathways back to regulation. She talks about finding glimmers, which are micro moments of safety or connection, not trying to feel calm all at once, which would be overwhelming, but noticing tiny moments when the nervous system briefly settles. A glimpse of something beautiful, a moment of connection with another person, a physical sensation of groundedness. These glimmers become the building blocks for expanding tolerance. The key principle across all these approaches is titration. This is a term borrowed from chemistry. When you're neutralizing a strong acid, you don't pour in the base all at once. You add it drop by drop, allowing the reaction to happen gradually without an explosion. Trauma healing works the same way. You don't flood yourself with the experiences you can't tolerate. You introduce them in small doses, allowing your nervous system time to adjust. This means that if clean spaces trigger you, the answer isn't to force yourself to live in a minimalist apartment and just deal with it. That would be flooding, and it would likely backfire. Instead, you might start with small experiments. Keep one corner of your room tidy for a day. Notice what comes up. Practice tolerating the discomfort for short periods, then return to what feels familiar. Gradually extend the duration. Let your nervous system learn, through direct experience, that the clean corner doesn't lead to disaster. Build the tolerance incrementally. The same principle applies to relationships. If stability triggers you, the answer isn't to white-knuckle your way through a healthy relationship while silently panicking. It's to work with the panic, to notice when it arises, to name it, to remind yourself that it's a response to the unfamiliarity, not to actual danger. To talk about it with your partner if you can. To work with a therapist who understands this pattern. To build tolerance for goodness slowly, in doses you can handle, rather than trying to leap from chaos to peace all at once. There's also the concept of co-regulation. Our nervous systems aren't designed to regulate alone. We're social animals. We learn to regulate through connection with others. When you're in the presence of someone whose nervous system is calm and grounded, your nervous system starts to mirror theirs. You borrow their regulation until you can build your own. This is why therapeutic relationships matter. A good therapist isn't just someone who gives you insight. They're someone whose regulated presence helps your nervous system learn what regulation feels like. Over time, through repeated experiences of co-regulation, you internalize the capacity. You start to be able to do for yourself what what you once needed someone else to do for you. And this is why safe relationships of all kinds matter. Friends, partners, mentors, communities, people who can be with you in your dysregulation without becoming dysregulated themselves. People whose calm is contagious, not people who tell you to calm down, which rarely helps. People whose actual presence helps calm you down, because nervous systems communicate directly below the level of words. There's something else important to say here, and it's about self-compassion. If you're someone whose nervous system learned to equate chaos with safety, you've probably spent a lot of time feeling broken, wondering what's wrong with you. Why can't you just relax like other people? Why does everything good feel threatening? Why do you keep sabotaging things? Nothing is wrong with you. Your nervous system is doing exactly what it was trained to do. It learned the lessons it needed to learn to survive the environment it found itself in. Those lessons saved you. That vigilance kept you safe when you needed to be kept safe. The fact that it's still running, even though the circumstances have changed, isn't a flaw. It's just the nature of how nervous systems work. They don't update automatically. They need new experiences repeated over time to learn new patterns. You're not broken, you're adapted, and adaptations can change. It takes time, it takes patience, it takes support. But the nervous system has plasticity throughout life. It can learn new things. It can expand its window of tolerance. It can develop the capacity to feel safe in situations that once triggered it. This isn't quick fix territory, but it's not impossible territory either. Deb Dana writes something that I think captures the hope here. She says that the good news is that no matter how the nervous system has been shaped, the capacity for moving out of protection and returning to connection is built into our biology. Your nervous system isn't permanently broken. The capacity for safety, for calm, for peace, it's already there. It's part of your biological inheritance. What happened to you in childhood didn't destroy that capacity. It just made it harder to access. The circuitry is still there. It just got buried under layers of protective response. The work of healing isn't building something new. It's uncovering something that was there all along. So here's where we're at. If clean spaces feel unsafe to you, that makes sense. Your nervous system learned that chaos was normal and calm was suspicious. It's still running that program, even though you're no longer living in the environment that taught you those lessons. If stable relationships feel boring or threatening, that makes sense too. Your attachment system got calibrated to unpredictability. It learned that love meant vigilance, that connection meant chaos, that the absence of drama meant something was wrong. If you find yourself sabotaging good things, waiting for the other shoe to drop, unable to tolerate success or happiness or peace, that makes sense. Your upper limit was set early, and you learned that exceeding it was dangerous. Your nervous system is trying to protect you by keeping you in familiar territory, even when familiar territory was painful. None of this is your fault. None of it means you're broken. All of it is the predictable result of a nervous system doing what nervous systems do, which is learn from experience and apply those lessons going forward. But here's the thing about lessons. They can be unlearned, not easily, not quickly, not through willpower or positive thinking or forcing yourself to tolerate things that terrify you, but through patient, gradual exposure, through somatic work that helps discharge old survival energy, through safe relationships that teach your nervous system what regulation feels like, through self-compassion that stops adding shame to the already heavy load. Your nervous system learned to survive in chaos. It can learn to thrive in peace. It just needs time, safety, and experiences that contradict the old programming. That clean apartment isn't dangerous. That stable relationship isn't a trap. That moment of peace isn't the calm before the storm. But your body doesn't know that yet. Your body is still bracing for something that happened years ago, still scanning for threats that aren't there anymore, still trying to protect you from dangers you've already survived. The work isn't to fight your nervous system. It's to gently teach it that the war is over, that you made it out, that safety exists, and you're allowed to have it. It won't happen overnight. There will be times when the clean room still makes you anxious, when the stable relationship still triggers panic, when the good thing happening in your life still makes you wait for everything to fall apart. That's okay. That's part of the process. The nervous system learns slowly, but it does learn. And maybe one day, you'll clean your apartment and just feel clean. You'll sit in the stillness and just feel still. You'll receive something good and just feel good, without the dread, without the waiting, without the bracing for impact. That's possible, not because I'm selling you hope, because it's built into your biology. The capacity for safety is already there. It's just been waiting for you to come find it. The research is clear on this point. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change and rewire itself, continues throughout life. The patterns you learned in childhood are strong, but they're not permanent. New experiences can create new neural pathways. Repeated experiences of safety can gradually shift the nervous system's default settings. It takes time and intention, and usually support, but it happens. People who grew up in chaos learn to tolerate peace. People whose nervous systems were calibrated to threat learn to recognize safety. It happens every day, in therapy offices, in recovery programs, in relationships where someone is patient enough to stay present while the other person learns to trust. Maybe it's time to start looking. But before we end, I want to go deeper on something, because understanding why this happens is only part of the story. The other part is understanding exactly what it feels like from the inside and how that experience differs so dramatically from what people who grew up in stable environments take for granted. There's a fundamental difference between someone whose nervous system learned safety early and someone whose nervous system learned threat. And that difference shows up in countless tiny moments throughout the day that most people never notice. When a person who grew up safe walks into a quiet room, their nervous system barely registers it. Quiet room? Okay. Nothing to note. Their brain files it under normal and moves on. There's no spike of alertness, no scanning for what might be wrong, no subtle tension in the shoulders, just a room, just quiet, just fine. When a person who grew up in chaos walks into that same quiet room, something entirely different happens. The quiet itself is a cue. It registers. The nervous system notices it the way a soldier notices an unusual silence on a battlefield. What's happening? Why is it so quiet? What am I missing? The body starts preparing for something, even though there's nothing to prepare for. Heart rate might tick up slightly. Muscles might tense. Attention narrows and focuses. looking for the thing that explains the uncomfortable feeling. And here's what's important. This isn't a thought process. The person in the quiet room isn't consciously thinking, "This is too quiet. Something must be wrong." The reaction is happening below consciousness, in the body, before the thinking mind gets involved. By the time they notice they're uncomfortable, the nervous system has already mobilized. The discomfort is already happening. The thinking mind comes in afterward, trying to make sense of a feeling that's already there. This is why it's so hard to talk yourself out of these responses. By the time you're aware of them, they're already in motion. The body has already decided. The thinking mind is just along for the ride, trying to catch up. And then something else happens. The thinking mind, trying to make sense of the uncomfortable feeling, starts generating explanations. Maybe I should check on something. Maybe I forgot to do something. Maybe I need to be productive right now. Maybe something is wrong with me. The mind creates stories to explain the body's response. And those stories often lead to behaviors that relieve the discomfort in the short term, but reinforce the pattern in the long term. So you get up from the couch. You find something to do. You create a little chaos, a little activity, a little stimulation, and the uncomfortable feeling fades. Your nervous system got what it wanted. It got stimulation. It got something to attend to. The vigilance had a target again. Everything feels more normal now, and the lesson gets reinforced. Clean quiet equals uncomfortable. Activity chaos equals relief. The nervous system files this away. Next time, it will be even more primed to react to quiet, because quiet led to discomfort, and activity led to relief. The pattern strengthens. This is how people get stuck in loops. Not because they're choosing chaos, not because they're addicted to drama, but because their nervous systems are running programs that were installed under completely different circumstances. And those programs keep getting reinforced by present-day behaviors that are just trying to manage present-day discomfort. Breaking the loop requires interrupting this sequence. And that's hard because the sequence happens fast, mostly outside of awareness, and the behaviors that relieve discomfort feel good in the moment. Why would you stop doing the thing that makes you feel better? The answer is that it only makes you feel better in the short term. In the long term, it keeps you trapped. It keeps your nervous system calibrated to chaos. It prevents you from ever developing tolerance for peace. You stay stuck in the same narrow window, unable to expand into states that would actually serve you better. This is where the concept of pendulation becomes important. Pendulation is a term from somatic therapy that describes the natural rhythm of moving between states of activation and settling. In a healthy nervous system, there's a natural pendulation. You get activated by something, and then you settle. You experience stress, and then you recover. The system swings back and forth, like a pendulum, never getting stuck at either extreme. In a traumatized nervous system, this pendulation gets disrupted. The system might get stuck in chronic activation, never fully settling, or it might swing wildly between extremes, either hyper-aroused or collapsed, without much time in the regulated middle. The natural rhythm is off. Healing involves restoring healthy pendulation, not trying to force yourself into permanent calm, which is neither possible nor desirable, but learning to swing between activation and settling, building the capacity to return to baseline after being triggered, expanding the amount of time you can spend in regulated states without getting overwhelmed. And here's the key. You build this capacity through small doses. You experience a little bit of the challenging state, then you pendulate back to something more comfortable. Then you experience a little more and pendulate back again. Each cycle stretches your capacity slightly. Over time, you can tolerate more. The window widens. The nervous system learns that it can handle states it once thought were threatening. Applied to clean spaces specifically, this might look like cleaning one small area and then sitting with whatever comes up. Not forcing yourself to sit there for hours. Just noticing. What do I feel? Where do I feel it in my body? What's the sensation? And then, if it gets too intense, allowing yourself to create a little mess again, to return to familiar ground. No judgment, just pendulation. Then doing it again and again. Each time, maybe sitting a little longer. Each time, maybe tolerating a little more spaciousness. The nervous system learns incrementally. It can't learn all at once, but it can learn piece by piece, experience by experience. There's something else I want to address, which is how this pattern interacts with shame. Because for most people who struggle with this, there's a layer of shame on top of everything else. They feel like they should be able to handle normal things. They feel embarrassed that a clean room makes them anxious. They compare themselves to other people who seem to function effortlessly in ordered environments and wonder what's wrong with them. This shame is understandable, but it's counterproductive. Shame activates the nervous system. It's a threat signal. When you feel ashamed of your response to clean spaces, you're adding activation on top of activation. You're making it harder for your nervous system to settle, not easier. Self-compassion is the antidote to shame, and it's also neurobiologically calming. When you treat yourself with kindness, when you understand your responses as adaptations rather than flaws, when you recognize that your nervous system is doing what it was trained to do, you reduce threat signals. You create a little more internal safety. And internal safety is exactly what your nervous system needs to learn that external safety can be trusted. So if you're sitting in a clean room and feeling anxious, the worst thing you can do is beat yourself up about it. That just adds another layer of stress. The better response is something like, "Of course, I feel anxious. My nervous system learned to equate quiet with danger. This makes sense given my history. I'm not broken. I'm just adapted to circumstances that no longer exist. And I'm going to be gentle with myself as I learn something new." That kind of self-talk isn't just nice words. It actually changes what's happening in your body. It activates the social engagement system. It sends cues of safety. It helps the nervous system recognize that right now, in this moment, there's no threat, not from the environment, not from yourself. Let's talk about something that often gets overlooked in these conversations, which is the physical body itself and how it holds these patterns. When you grew up in chaos, you didn't just learn cognitive patterns about what's safe and what's dangerous. Your body learned physical patterns, the way you hold your shoulders, the tension in your jaw, the shallowness of your breath, the way you sit, stand, move through space. All of these are shaped by years of living in a state of chronic readiness. Peter Levine, who developed somatic experiencing, emphasizes that trauma is stored in the body, not as a metaphor. Literally, the muscles hold tension, the fascia holds patterns, The breath holds restrictions. The body remembers what the mind might have forgotten, and it keeps responding as if the past is still present. This is why talking about your trauma, while valuable, isn't always enough. You can understand your history perfectly and still carry the tension in your body. You can have complete insight into why you react the way you react, and the reactions keep happening because the body hasn't released what it's holding. Pat Ogden, who developed sensorimotor psychotherapy, works specifically with these physical patterns. She might notice that a client always sits in a braced posture, ready to spring into action or defend themselves. She might work with that posture directly, helping the client feel what it's like to let the shoulders drop, to let the spine release, to occupy space differently. And those physical changes create psychological changes. The body and mind are not separate. Changing how you hold yourself changes how you feel. This is relevant to clean spaces because the body has a physical response to environment. Walk into a cluttered room and your body does something. Walk into a sparse room and it does something different. For trauma survivors, the something different might be bracing, tensing, preparing. And those physical responses reinforce the psychological experience of discomfort. Working with the body directly can interrupt this cycle. If you can notice the physical tension arising when you enter a clean space, and if you can consciously soften, breathe, let go even a little bit, you send different signals to your nervous system. You're not just thinking about being safe. You're physically embodying safety, and that embodiment teaches the nervous system in a language it understands. There's a phrase that comes up a lot in this work. You have to feel it to heal it. What this means is that the patterns stored in your nervous system can't be released purely through understanding. They have to be felt, experienced, moved through. The survival energy that got trapped has to be discharged. The body has to complete the responses it couldn't complete at the time. This is uncomfortable. Feeling what you've been avoiding is by definition not pleasant. This is why people avoid it. This is why we develop all sorts of strategies to not feel, to stay busy, to stay distracted, to keep the environment chaotic enough that there's no space for uncomfortable feelings to arise. But the avoidance has a cost. The unfelt feelings don't go away. They stay stuck. They keep running the same programs. They keep narrowing your window of tolerance. They keep making peace feel threatening. The only way out is through. And I want to be clear about what through actually looks like, because it's easy to romanticize healing, to imagine some dramatic breakthrough where everything changes. That's not how it usually works. Healing is mostly boring. It's repetitive. It's doing the same things over and over, building capacity incrementally, having small experiences that slightly expand what you can tolerate. It's sitting in the clean room for 5 minutes when you could only sit there for 3 before. It's noticing the anxiety arise and letting it be there without immediately trying to fix it or escape it. It's breathing through discomfort instead of creating stimulation to distract from it. It's one small choice at a time, repeated hundreds of times, until the nervous system finally starts to believe that quiet doesn't mean danger. There's nothing exciting about this. There's no moment where angels sing and you're suddenly cured. There's just the gradual, almost imperceptible shifting of a system that's been calibrated one way, slowly learning it can be calibrated another way. Through doesn't mean flooding yourself. It doesn't mean forcing yourself to feel everything all at once. That's not therapeutic. That's re-traumatizing. Through means titrated exposure, small doses, controlled contact with the discomfort, enough to move the needle without overwhelming the system. And through requires support. It requires a felt sense of safety, whether from a therapist, a trusted friend, or a well-developed internal capacity for self-regulation. You need a foot in safe ground while you explore the territory that feels threatening. That anchoring is what allows exploration without drowning. Let me come back to something I mentioned earlier, which is how this pattern shows up in relationships. Because for many people, this is actually where it causes the most pain. Clean spaces you can kind of manage. You can keep some mess around. You can avoid minimalist apartments. You can make adjustments. But relationships, those are harder to control. And the patterns run deep. I said earlier that stable relationships can feel boring to people who grew up in chaos. Let me unpack that more, because it's such a common experience and it causes so much confusion and heartbreak. What makes a relationship feel exciting to someone whose nervous system is calibrated to chaos? Usually, it's uncertainty, not knowing where you stand, having to work for attention, the thrill of connection after distance, the relief of making up after a fight, the intensity that comes from emotional volatility. All of these create activation in the nervous system. And for someone who's used to running on high alert, activation feels like aliveness. It feels like connection. It feels like love. Because the nervous system doesn't distinguish between excitement and anxiety. Both involve similar physiological states: increased heart rate, heightened attention, elevated stress hormones. The body can interpret these sensations as passion as easily as it interprets them as fear. Often more easily if fear was the water you swam in growing up. So a relationship with a calm, steady, available partner, that relationship doesn't create much activation. There's no uncertainty to navigate. There's no emotional roller coaster. There's no intensity, at least not the kind that comes from chaos. The nervous system looks at this relationship and says, nothing's happening here. This isn't interesting. This isn't love. But something is happening. What's happening is different from what the nervous system recognizes as love. But it's actually love in a healthier form. It's presence. It's reliability. It's the quiet building of trust over time. It's the deep security of knowing someone will be there, not just in the dramatic moments, but in the ordinary ones. That kind of love doesn't create spikes of intensity. It creates something more like a steady warmth. And for someone whose nervous system is looking for spikes, warmth doesn't register. It feels like absence. It feels like something's missing. And then the person thinks, I must not really love them. Or they think, this relationship must not be right. And they leave. And they find someone who creates more activation. And the cycle repeats. Learning to recognize quiet love requires rewiring what feels like love in the body. It requires building tolerance for steady warmth, for presence without drama, for security without intensity. It requires the nervous system to learn that love can feel like calm, not just like chaos. That presence can feel like connection, not just like boredom. This is hard work. It goes against everything the body learned. But it's possible. People do it. People who grew up in chaos learn to recognize and appreciate steady love. People whose nervous systems were calibrated to drama develop the capacity for peace. It takes time, and it takes intention, and it often takes help. But it happens. There's one more thing I want to say before we close, and it's about integration. Because I've spent a lot of this video talking about people who grew up in chaos, people whose nervous systems are calibrated to threat. But I want to acknowledge that even for those people, chaos isn't all they know. Even the most chaotic childhood had moments of safety. Even the most hypervigilant nervous system has states of calm. Even if they're brief, even if they're rare, the work isn't to create something entirely new. It's to strengthen what already exists. It's to find those moments of regulation that already happen, sometimes without you noticing them, and to build on them. It's to recognize that the capacity for peace is already in you, wired into your biology, just waiting to be accessed more fully. Deb Dana talks about this in terms of glimmers. Glimmers are the opposite of triggers. Triggers are cues that activate the stress response. Glimmers are cues that activate the relaxation response. They're micro moments of safety. A warm cup of tea, sunlight on your skin, a moment of connection with someone you trust, the feeling of being understood. These glimmers happen all the time, but we often don't notice them because the nervous system is biased toward threat detection. We notice what's wrong much more readily than we notice what's right. But with practice, you can start to notice glimmers, and noticing them strengthens them. It builds neural pathways for recognizing safety. It expands your capacity to access regulated states. So maybe the practice isn't just about tolerating clean spaces. Maybe it's about noticing the glimmers wherever they occur. The moment of calm that happens naturally sometimes. Maybe when you first wake up. Maybe when you're doing something you enjoy. Maybe when you're with someone who feels safe. Noticing those moments. Letting them land. Not rushing past them to the next problem to solve. This is quiet work. It's not dramatic. There's no catharsis, no breakthrough, no single moment when everything changes. Just a gradual accumulation of experiences that contradict the old programming. Just the nervous system slowly learning that safety exists and that maybe, just maybe, it's allowed to rest in it sometimes. Your nervous system learned to survive in chaos. It did that job well. It kept you alive. It kept you alert. It protected you in the only ways it knew how. And honestly, that deserves some acknowledgement. That part of you that stayed vigilant, that part of you that kept scanning for threats, that part of you that never let its guard down, that part kept you safe when you needed keeping safe. But you're not in that environment anymore. You're here, wherever here is. Maybe in a clean apartment that makes you anxious. Maybe in a stable relationship that confuses you. Maybe in a life that's calmer than anything you knew as a child. And yet you still can't shake the feeling that something bad is about to happen. That feeling makes sense, but it's not the whole truth. It's the echo of an old truth, reverberating through a nervous system that hasn't yet learned how much has changed. The world isn't as dangerous as it felt when you were small. You aren't as powerless as you were then. And peace, real peace, the kind that doesn't precede an explosion, the kind that just exists on its own terms, that kind of peace is possible for you. Not yet, maybe, not easily, not overnight, but possible. Because it's already in your biology. It's already part of who you are. It's just been buried under years of vigilance, waiting for you to decide that it's safe enough to excavate. Maybe that clean room isn't the problem. Maybe it's the invitation to finally put down the scanning, the bracing, the waiting. The invitation to see what happens when you let yourself rest, not just your body, but your whole nervous system. The vigilant part, the watching part, the part that's been on duty since before you can remember. Maybe it's time to tell that part it can stand down now. Not because there was never any danger. There was. You survived it. But because that was then, and this is now, and now is allowed to be different. The clean room is just a clean room. The quiet is just quiet. The calm is just calm. And you, sitting in the middle of it, nervous and uncomfortable, and waiting for something bad to happen, you're allowed to discover that sometimes nothing bad comes. Sometimes the quiet stays quiet. Sometimes the clean room stays clean. Sometimes the only thing that happens next is more of what's already happening, which is nothing much, which is just fine, which is maybe even good. Your nervous system doesn't believe that yet, but maybe it can learn. Maybe it's time to find out.